Well, good morning. Welcome back to the Higher Grounds podcast. This is your morning minute meditation for this morning. I'd like for you to take your Bibles and go with us to the book of Psalms. Psalms chapter number 95. And I want to read to you the first 6 verses, make a few comments concerning this text, and hope this will be a help and a blessing to you on this morning. Psalms chapter number 95, and verse number 1. Come, let us sing unto the Lord. Let us make a joyful noise to the rock of our salvation. Let us come before his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise unto him with psalms. For the Lord is a great God and a great King above all gods. In his hands are the deep places of the earth. The strength of the hills is his also. The sea is his, and he made it, and his hands formed the dry land. Verse number 6 closes, O come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord our Maker. You'll notice that there is a phrase that sticks out in Psalms chapter number 95. And that phrase is the rock of our salvation. And so we find that this is a psalm of worship. The subject and the source of our worship comes from the rock of our salvation. The rock speaks of a place of security, a place of strength. And so we find that David, the psalmist in our text, is worshiping God for the rock of his salvation. In verse number 1 and 2, there's an invitation to worship. You'll notice in verse 1 and verse number 2, the word come is mentioned. It is 2 different words, one in verse 1 and one in verse 2. One in verse 1 deals with the way we walk or carry ourselves. The one in verse number 2 means to project or to proceed or to anticipate. And so this come to worship is we sing in verse 1, there's the direction in verse 1 to come. And then in verse number 2, there's the desire to come. When you get to verses 3 through 5, you'll find there's an explanation of worship. So we find the psalm has given us an explanation on why he is worshiping. It's twofold. He said, first of all, that God is great. That is an adjective used to describe the greatness of God's quality, his character here in the text. He's great in character in verse number 3, and he's great in creation in verse 4 and verse number 5. And then thirdly and finally, in verse number 6, we find the adoration of worship. I begin to think about worship is not always done by jubilation, but sometimes adoration can be done in silence. Matter of fact, if you're familiar with 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 12 and through 13, you'll find that when Hannah comes, she makes her prayers to the Lord, and the Bible says that Eli marked her mouth because she moved her mouth, but no words come out. And so we find that adoration in the text simply means to pay homage to, deep love and respect. Verse number 6 is the third come in these 6 verses. It means to employ and to enter in. In other words, this is to worship. This is to come in to worship God here in Psalms chapter number 63. Why? Because he is the rock of our salvation. Think on these things.